In this video, I want to talk about the question of biblical violence, the conception of honor killing, and address the issue of cognitive dissonance that I think Christians often have. I want to begin with an example from the Canadian news. So in 2010, this individual, his name was Mohammed Parvez, he was convicted of murdering his 16-year-old daughter, Aqsa. He strangled her to death in 2007. In fact, he admitted in court, "I killed her with my own hands," he said. Together with one of his sons, he strangled Aqsa to death. And he did so because Aqsa was subverting his parental authority repeatedly. She refused to wear the hijab or to conform to their conservative Muslim mores. She wanted to go out and party and hang out with friends. And so the way Mr. Parvez responded was with the ultimate price, by strangling his daughter to death. This is an example of honor killing. And Amnesty International describes honor killing like this: the mere perception that a woman has contravened the code of sexual behavior damages honor. The regime of honor is unforgiving. Women on whom suspicion has fallen are not given an opportunity to defend themselves. And family members have no socially acceptable alternative but to remove the stain on their honor by attacking the woman. Honor killing includes then some reference to gender and social roles and fertility and conceptions such as this. But at the core of honor killing is this notion precisely of honor, that you've dishonored a person, you've dishonored a parent in this case, and so the parent can visit the ultimate act of violence against this child in order to reestablish familial honor. The thing is this, that I suspect the vast majority of Christians, when you read or heard about Muhammad killing Aqsa, you were horrified at Mr. Parvez's actions. You were repulsed by it, and you are repulsed every time you read or hear about an honor killing in the news. Keeping that in mind, I now want to turn to Deuteronomy 21 and look at how Deuteronomy 21, I think, addresses an issue of honor as well. Now, this is not an honor killing. I want to be clear on that, in the sense of specifically focused on the female sex and refusing to adopt certain sexual and social mores, inflicting authority over fertility per se, and some other aspects of gendered relations. But there is nonetheless, I think, clearly a factor of honor present here. So if someone has a stubborn and rebellious son, we read, who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of this town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and be afraid." This is a shocking text. Some people say, well, there's no evidence that Israel ever carried out the text, carried out this mandate, that any child ever was stoned. But that really misses the point. The issue is not whether or not it was acted upon, but whether or not it is a just law. And you can ask that question irrespective of whether it was ever acted upon. Now, the one thing I wanted to look at here is that it doesn't just specify killing, it specifies stoning. And stoning is one of these uniquely barbaric, violent, cruel ways of executing a person or killing a person. And if you don't believe me, and if you're like many people, they've grown up in the church and they read about stoning all the time in the Bible, so it doesn't really strike them, pardon me, that's an unintended pun. It doesn't really hit them. I don't know. It doesn't really affect them as it should, because they've just always read about stoning. Watch the I think it was 2008 film, The Stoning of Soraya M. It tells the story, it's a drama, it tells the story of a woman named Soraya who was stoned to death, I think in the year 1980 in Iran. So a modern case, a true case, and it recreates over about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the film an agonizingly paced scene of Soraya slowly being stoned to death. pelted. There's one scene, there's one moment where a rock is thrown at her, a sharp rock, and it strikes her in the forehead, and her head snaps back and then comes forward, and blood spurts out, and then she just screams. That brings home to you just a glimpse of the horror of killing a person by pelting them to death with rocks. That's what we're talking about here, okay? It's not just execution, which is horrific enough. It is an especially cruel way of killing a human being. I don't believe our moral intuitions are infallible, but I do believe when we respond viscerally, a properly functioning moral agent responds viscerally in revulsion to a description like this, that is prima facie excellent evidence that we need to reconsider what is going on here and the ethics thereof. Now, I'm not the first person to recognize that this text presents a moral challenge. Eugene Merrill, in his commentary on Deuteronomy, recognizes that. And I want you to listen to his words. He concedes the moral struggle that is presented by this text, and then he tries to justify it or give an apologetic for it. He says the severity of the punishment appears to outweigh the crime, but we must recognize that parental sovereignty was at stake. Were insubordination of children toward their parents to have been tolerated, there would have been but a short step toward the insubordination of all the Lord's servant people to him, the King of Kings. That's the justification. If you allow this child to dishonor you as parents, then pretty soon everybody is going to reject the authority of parents and indeed the very authority of God himself. So honor must be restored. This child must be pelted to death with rocks. That's the logic of honor killing. The honor of the parents and of God must be restored. Kill the child. You may think that that is an adequate defense of this action. But if you don't, I think that you really owe it to yourself to be consistent and to do one of two things. Either revise your moral prohibitive status of contemporary honor killing and recognize that at least in principle it may be possible and legitimate for fathers to strangle their daughters for being insubordinate and dishonoring them, or go the other direction and say, no, you know what, this really wasn't justified. It's not justified ever to pelt children to death with rocks or to strangle them because they've dishonored you. It's just not right. Now, in favor of the latter approach, I'm going to just say, imagine that you read another contemporary case. This one is fictional. I made this up, but you could be very well something you read. So let's say that you came across this in the news. Yesterday, reports surfaced of a public stoning in the city of Saidu Sharif in the Swat Valley of eastern Afghanistan. Early reports identify two parents as presenting their 13-year-old son to public authorities for being stubborn and rebellious. Town elders gathered together and stoned the boy until he was dead. The al-Qaeda-held district of Swat has become notorious in recent months for its enforcement of a strict Sharia law. Associated Press. If you read that or heard that, would your first response be, well, I mean, if the parents didn't stone the kid, what's the next thing that's going to happen? I mean, they're going to be rejecting God altogether. Or would you have said, that's morally abominable? That could never be justified. That's horrific. And if your response is the latter, again, I think you owe it to yourself to rethink how you understand Old Testament law, the Torah. Doesn't mean rejecting it, doesn't mean rejecting the Bible. Because this has been an open conversation among Christians and Jews, indeed, for millennia. What it does mean, however, is that I don't think you should subvert your deepest moral intuitions or live in an untenable cognitive dissonance. I think it's an issue that has to be addressed. And so I would encourage Christians everywhere, don't just set it aside. Look squarely at the most morally problematic and troubling aspects of the law, and then consider how you're going to read the Bible and understand speaking through and working through those texts in light of the moral difficulties that they present.